A sharp laugh cracked through the crowded Walmart. Off-duty and cocky, a white cop chuckled at a little black girl who just said her mom was in the army. The store froze. The girl lowered her eyes, clutching the red tumbler she'd picked as a birthday gift, its silver letters reading, Army Mom. He didn't know that in just a few minutes, that same mother would walk through those sliding doors in full uniform and turn his laughter into the kind of silence that follows shame. The laughter cut through the noise of the Walmart like a blade through thin glass, sharp, unexpected, and ugly. People turned their heads toward the sound. Aisle 6, right between the checkout counters and the line of impulse buy candy bars, was suddenly a stage. Officer Dale Harris, dressed in jeans and a faded fishing shirt, had just leaned back and let out that laugh, a short, harsh burst that carried farther than it should have. He wasn't in uniform, but his badge glinted at his belt, catching the fluorescent light as if it, too, enjoyed the show. The reason for the laughter stood barely 4 feet away. A little black girl with braids tied in red ribbons, her small hands wrapped around a gift box that said, Army Mom. Her name was Lila Brooks, and she was 11. She looked up, confused, her wide brown eyes searching the man's face for something. Understanding, maybe, but all she found was mockery. What's so funny? She asked quietly, though her voice trembled. Harris shook his head, still smirking. Nothing, sweetheart. Just, you said your mom's in the army, right? That's a new one. His tone stretched the words like gum, sticky with disbelief. The people in line shifted. A mother with a toddler pretended to rearrange her cart. A teenage boy pulled out his phone, trying not to smile as he whispered to his friend. The old man at the lottery ticket machine looked away, pretending to study his numbers. Lila swallowed hard. She is, she said, clutching the box tighter. She's a captain. The man chuckled again, softer this time, but still sharp enough to sting. A captain, huh? I've been around the block, kid. You sure she's not, working for the army? Cleaning the barracks, maybe? The words hit her like cold water. Her Aunt Ruby, who had been scanning a shelf of discount candles a few steps away, turned sharply. Excuse me? She said, stepping closer. Did you just... Harris held up a hand, all fake politeness. Ma'am, just having a little fun. Kids say wild things. I didn't mean... But the damage was done. The laughter, the looks, the whispers, they hung in the air like a bad smell. Lila felt them pressing in on her, every smirk a stone added to her chest. She didn't cry, though. She wanted to. Her throat felt thick, her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. Her mom had always told her, when people laugh at what they don't understand, you stand taller. Don't give them your tears. So she did. She straightened her back and looked him dead in the eye. My mom's in the army, she said again. You can laugh if you want, but it's true. That made him laugh harder. Oh, I believe you, kid. Sure. Maybe she's a secret agent too, right? Flying jets or something. He turned slightly, looking around for approval, and a few people gave him the kind of polite chuckle you give when you don't want to get involved. Ruby stepped in front of her niece. You don't talk to a child like that? Harris's grin thinned. Relax, ma'am. No harm done. Just saying, folks make up stories. You'd be surprised how many do. Lila stared down at her sneakers, her reflection warped in the polished tile. She hated that everyone was watching. She hated the way the man's voice filled the space, like he owned it. And worst of all, she hated the little flutter of doubt that crept into her own chest, because when enough people laugh, even truth starts to sound like a lie. Ruby's voice was shaking now, half with anger, half with disbelief. You should be ashamed. Harris shrugged, adjusting the badge on his belt. Ashamed? For what? Asking a question? A small boy near the magazine rack whispered, Why is he picking on her? His mother hushed him, but not before the question floated out into the silence. It hung there for a long, uncomfortable second, until Harris coughed and looked away. Lila wished her mom were there. She pictured her, tall, strong, in her camouflage uniform, boots polished, eyes calm and steady. She always smelled faintly of soap and metal, like discipline itself. Her mom never raised her voice, never had to. The room just knew. But she wasn't here, not yet. Harris shifted his weight, realizing maybe he'd gone a bit too far, but he couldn't help himself. Pride was a hard thing to put down once you'd picked it up. Listen, sweetheart, he said, his voice dropping to something almost patronizing. The world's tough. It's okay to dream big. But you don't have to make up stories to be proud. Ruby gasped. She didn't make anything up. Lila looked up again, and this time her voice didn't shake. You'll see. That stopped him. For a second, the smirk faltered. He studied her face. No fear, just quiet certainty, and he didn't know what to do with it. So he laughed again, but the sound came out thinner, more forced. Sure, kid, he said. We'll see. The cashier scanned another item, the soft beep cutting through the tension. Someone cleared their throat. Life resumed its rhythm, but not for Lila. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears as she placed the gift box on the counter. The words Army Mom gleamed in silver against the red background. The sight steadied her, a small anchor in a sea of eyes. Ruby leaned down and whispered, Ignore him, baby. He's not worth it. But Lila couldn't. Not this time. The laugh, the faces, the disbelief, they all etched themselves into her mind. She didn't know it yet, but every second of that humiliation was building towards something bigger, something that would turn the laughter back on itself. When they left the store a few minutes later, Harris was still standing near the counter, scrolling his phone as if nothing had happened. The badge at his hip caught the light again, bright and hollow. Outside, the sun was sliding low across the parking lot. Ruby unlocked the car, and Eli climbed into the back seat, clutching a small balloon that said, Happy birthday, Mom! Lila stayed by the door, still holding the gift box. Ruby looked at her through the open window. You okay, sweetheart? Lila nodded, but her voice came out low, steady. Yeah, I hope he's still there when Mom gets here. Ruby frowned. What do you mean? Lila glanced back toward the automatic doors, her reflection caught in the glass. Because she's coming, and when she does. She drew a breath, her eyes shining with something between hurt and defiance. He's going to see what a real soldier looks like. Inside, somewhere beyond the aisles and the noise, Officer Harris was still laughing, but not for long. The afternoon light over the parking lot had that soft Carolina gold to it, washing the Walmart sign in a glow that made everything look kinder than it usually was. Ruby parked 2 rows from the entrance and killed the engine, drumming the steering wheel in a little rhythm the kids knew by heart. In the back seat, Eli wrestled with his seatbelt like it was a wild snake. I got it, he said, and then couldn't get it. Lila leaned over and clicked it loose with a practiced hand. You're welcome, she said, trying not to smile too big. She didn't want to seem bossy, not today. They crossed the lot with a birthday card tucked under Lila's arm, the kind with a pop-up star and a small flag that would flutter when you opened it. The air smelled like cut grass from a landscaping truck and warm rubber from the shopping carts. Ruby grabbed a cart and patted its handle with a disinfectant wipe like she always did. Habit, care, the kind of small ritual moms and aunts carry because someone has to. Inside was all noise and neon. Country music hummed low from a speaker near the bakery. A kid cried somewhere over by toys. A woman laughed near the perfume counter in a way that made you wonder if she was trying to convince herself. The big blue signs pointed everywhere and nowhere. Lila led, scanning the aisles the way she'd seen her mom scan a room, efficient, eyes up, feet sure. Today had a mission. Get something that said exactly who Naomi Brooks was and who she'd been to them even when she was gone. Drinkware first, Ruby said, nodding toward home goods. We'll circle back for wrapping paper when we decide. Eli veered toward electronics with the mindless hope of a 9-year-old. Can we look at the games? 10 minutes if you don't disappear, Ruby said, without breaking stride. She had a way of keeping the herd moving with 2 sentences. They peeled right at the candles, past the aisle that smelled like plastic pools, and turned into a long run of shelves stacked with tumblers, mugs, and water bottles in colors that could make you dizzy. Lila slowed, taking it in. There were glitter cups and ones with straws that looped like roller coasters, stainless steel monsters that promised to keep ice for 40 hours, and a few cheaper ones with cartoon frogs. None of it was right. She walked past the rainbow, fingers grazing lids and tags, until she stopped like a bird dog locking on a scent. It was simple. Matte red, heavy in a way that felt honest, with a powder coat she knew would stand up to the dishwasher no matter what Eli swore he would remember. Across the front, clean as a drumbeat, the words Army Mom in silver that caught the light. No hearts, no glitter, just the truth. Lila lifted it with both hands and her chest did that small rising thing good decisions cause. This one, she said. Ruby raised her eyebrows and smiled with the side of her mouth. You picked that fast. It's her, Lila said, almost under her breath. They brought it to the end of the aisle where a small engraving kiosk sat, run by a young woman with lavender nail polish and a name tag that said Brittany. She had a tiny hoop in her nose and an expression that said she'd seen it all and wasn't mad about it. Look at you, Brittany said when she saw the tumbler. You're making me jealous. My moma'd drink out of that for the rest of her life. It's for my mom's birthday, Lila said, trying not to sound too proud and failing. She's in the Army. We wanted to put her name under Army Mom, just small, like right here. Brittany's face softened. Well, tell her thank you from me. What's her name, baby? Naomi Brooks. Captain, Lila said, and she couldn't help it. The word captain came out like a little bell. Okay, Captain Naomi Brooks, Brittany said, fingers flying on the kiosk screen. Block font? Script? We can do a little star there, see? Block, Lila said after a second. She doesn't like frills. I hear that, Ruby said, chuckling. She ironed our kitchen towels once. Brittany laughed. Lord, okay, block it is. You want a date under it? The year? Lila looked to Ruby, who nodded. Go on. Make it yours. 2025, Lila said. And can you put we're proud of you on the back? Small, not big, just there. That's sweet, Brittany said. Where's she stationed? Texas this month, Lila said. Fort Cavazos for training, but she's coming home for the weekend. The happiness slipped into her voice like sunshine through a blind. A boy in a faded hoodie drifted closer from the aisle, phone in his hand, the camera already up like a habit. He was maybe 17, with acne and curiosity. Your mom's in the Army? He asked, somewhere between interest and entertainment. She is, Lila said, standing a little taller. You serious? She's a captain type of in the Army, Ruby added, trying to sound casual, but coming off a little protective. The boy smirked at his phone, thumb moving, then wandered away when he realized he wasn't going to get the laugh he was hunting. Brittany pretended not to notice, but her mouth tightened a hair. It's going to be ready in 15, Brittany said. I'll page you if you want to keep shopping. Looks good, by the way. Thank you, Lila said, and then, because her mama taught her, we appreciate you. They drifted toward cards. Lila tested a few, opening them and wincing at the ones that blared tinny songs. She picked a simple one with a small gold star and a blank inside that felt like possibility. Eli surfaced from electronics, clutching a pack of cheap balloons and a roll of camo duct tape he didn't need but had already imagined 10 uses for. Can we put the tape on the card? He asked. Like a border? Ruby looked at the price and then at his face. We're not taping the card, Picasso, but we can use it for the gift wrap if you promise to cut it straight. I can cut straight, he lied cheerfully. As they walked back toward the kiosk, Lila's mind wandered where it always did when the air got quiet. She pictured her mother's hands, strong, with that little white scar on her thumb from the time she carved a birdhouse with them in the backyard. She pictured the living room wall where the shadow box hung, not crowded, just measured. Medals, ribbons, her nameplate. She loved the way her mother looked at it, not proud in the loud way, but in the way of someone who'd done the work and didn't need anyone to clap. The thought warmed her like a quilt. She wanted this gift to sit on the counter beside the coffee machine and say, every morning, what they didn't always have words for. Right as they reached the kiosk again, Brittany looked up with a little flourish. Boom! Come see! The engraving was crisp, the letters so clean they almost hummed. Captain Naomi Brooks sat neat under Army Mom, with 2025 and a tiny star lined up like they'd always been meant to live there. On the back, small and stubborn, the words, "We're proud of you." Lila traced a fingertip over the letters. It's perfect, she said, and the words came out thick. She cleared her throat. Thank you. On the house, Brittany said softly. Don't argue. Just tell her we said thanks. Ruby reached for her wallet anyway, and Brittany waved her off with an efficient flick. I said what I said. They headed toward checkout with the tumbler, the card, a roll of brown paper, and the camo tape Eli wouldn't stop grinning about. The express lane was jammed, so they slid into a regular line and waited while the conveyor belt rattled and beeped. The cashier was a college kid with sweet eyes and a crew cut that looked too new for his head. His name tag said Trey. He scanned the tumbler and paused. "That's sharp," he said. "My uncle was at Fort Cavazos a few years. You got family there now?" "My mom," Lila said, and couldn't help the smile that rose. "She's coming home tonight. We're surprising her." "She's a captain," Eli said, because this was one of those facts that felt like a drum he wanted to beat. Trey's face brightened. "Well, tell Captain Brooks we appreciate her. You want me to slap a gift receipt on that? Saves headaches." "Please," Ruby said. "You've been trained by a black mama, I can tell." "I've been trained by return season," Trey said, and everyone laughed a little. It broke the air in a gentle way. Behind them, a couple in workout clothes edged closer, impatient but listening. Ahead, a man in a ball cap shifted and looked back at the tumbler again, as if he'd missed something the first time. The boy with the hoodie reappeared at the head of the aisle, pretending to look at gum, his phone tucked low in his palm like a secret. "Y'all doing cake or pie?" Trey asked, sliding the card through the little bag he double-bagged like he was packing something fragile. "My mom swore by pies for birthdays, pecan if she was showing off." "Vanilla cake," Eli said, "with blue frosting like her uniform." "That uniform ain't blue," Ruby said, smiling, "but the love sure is." It was such a small line and such a big truth that Trey nodded like he'd heard a sermon. As they finished paying, the store loudspeaker crackled with some code that meant something to someone, and a voice asked for assistance in housewares. The world kept spinning in its ordinary way. They gathered their bags and began that walk toward the automatic doors that always felt like a tunnel of light and noise. Lila held the tumbler close against her chest, as if it might float away if she didn't anchor it. "I can't wait to see her face," she said. "She'll act cool and then cry later in the bathroom like always," Ruby said, not unkindly. "Soldier tears are private." They reached the doors, and the air shifted, a warm wave rolling in from the parking lot. For a heartbeat, everything was the way it should be, gift in hand, plan in place, love wrapped in paper. Lila could already picture the moment. Her mom stepping into the kitchen, boots quiet, eyes tired but brightening, the kids shouting surprise, the way Naomi would run a thumb over the letters, like she was reading Braille for the first time. She didn't see the man in the fishing shirt by the self-checkout, not yet. She didn't see the badge at his belt or the curious tilt of his head. That would come later, a sour note in a good song. For now, there was only the hum of the cartwheels, the squeak of Eli's sneakers, Ruby's keys chiming in her hand, and the weight of the red tumbler against Lila's ribs. Solid, certain, and exactly right. The hum of the store grew heavier as the afternoon wore on, a steady rhythm of carts clanking, cash registers beeping, and voices rising then falling again. By the time Ruby and the kids reached the bakery aisle, the smell of warm bread and sugar hung thick in the air. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed, and the sound echoed through the cavernous space like a bell. It was an ordinary Saturday, the kind of day that didn't promise anything remarkable. And that's exactly when things usually happen, the moments that don't give you a warning. Officer Dale Harris was leaning on a display of fishing poles near the front of the store, watching the crowd drift by. Out of uniform, he looked more like someone's tired uncle than a man with authority. Jeans, a Carolina Panthers t-shirt, and that badge clipped casually to his belt like a souvenir. His day had started slow. Too much coffee, not enough peace. The department had put him on desk duty for a personnel review, a polite way of saying someone had filed another complaint. He told himself it was nonsense, just another thing blown out of proportion in a world that didn't respect cops anymore. He'd been on the force for 20 years. He'd seen things these people couldn't imagine. So when he overheard a girl talking about the Army, it hit that raw place in him, the one that believed he could still tell the difference between what was real and what was talk. He spotted them by the home goods section. A black woman in her 40s with that mix of grace and exhaustion mothers carry, a little boy tugging on her sleeve, and the girl, the one holding a bright red tumbler with silver letters that caught the light every time she moved. She was speaking to the cashier, her voice small but clear. He couldn't hear the words, just the tone, earnest, proud, unshakable. "She's in the Army," the girl said, loud enough now that he caught it. "She's coming home tonight. She's a captain." The words landed in his ear like a dare. Harris straightened up, lips curling into something between a smile and a smirk. A captain? That little thing's mom? He looked at the tumbler again, Army Mom, and felt a twinge of something he didn't name. He told himself it wasn't about race. It never was. He'd say it was about facts, about what he knew from experience. But deep down, there was that old ache of superiority that had always needed feeding. He walked closer, pretending to study a rack of sunglasses, listening. The aunt was laughing with the cashier about frosting. The boy was bouncing on his heels, and the girl, she was glowing. Harris didn't mean to, but he chuckled under his breath. It wasn't loud at first, just a short sound, enough for the girl to glance his way. She caught the flicker of his badge, and her smile faltered. "You got something funny, mister?" Ruby asked, voice edged with suspicion. Harris turned, still smiling that lazy, tired smile. "No, ma'am. Just heard your niece there say her mom's a captain. That's quite a story." "It's not a story," Lila said, her small voice suddenly steady. "She's really in the Army." He let out a small laugh again, shaking his head. "You sure about that, sweetheart? 'Cause I've been around the service, worked with plenty of soldiers. Don't think I've met too many captains that fit that description." Ruby's eyes narrowed. "What description exactly?" He shrugged, palms up in mock surrender. "Just saying, captains usually don't leave their kids running around Walmart bragging, that's all. Not very regulation." A few people turned their heads now. The sound of a joke, especially one at someone else's expense, always had that magnetic pull. The teenage boy who'd been filming earlier sidled closer, his phone now angled lower, pretending to scroll. A mother at the next register slowed her scanning. The air shifted. Ruby took a step closer, her voice lowering. "You don't know us, and you sure as hell don't know her mother." Harris smirked. "I don't have to. You hear things long enough, you get a sense for what's real." He looked at Lila again, his tone softening, but only to make the sting sharper. "It's okay, kid. We all make stuff up sometimes. Makes life easier." The words pressed into Lila like weight. Her throat closed, her fingers gripping the tumbler so hard her knuckles turned white. She wanted to shout, to tell him about the medals, the letters, the way her mother's boots clicked against the floor when she came home from deployment. But all that came out was a small, stubborn breath. "I'm not lying." That only made him laugh harder. "Hey, I believe you," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe she's running secret missions for Santa Claus, too." The boy behind the phone snorted. That sound, the quick burst of someone else's laughter, burned worse than the man's words. Lila's chest tightened, her heart thudding loud enough to drown out the store's music. Ruby glanced around, seeing no one coming to their defense, no manager, no bystander willing to speak up. The silence was an accomplice. "Let's go," Ruby said softly, placing a hand on Lila's shoulder. "He's not worth it." But Lila didn't move. Her feet felt glued to the floor. "She's a captain," she repeated, the words cracking but unbroken. "You'll see." That line caught Harris off guard. For a second his smirk slipped and he looked at her differently, like he couldn't decide if she was naive or dangerous in her certainty. He adjusted his badge, as if to remind everyone he had authority here, even in jeans. "Sure," he said finally, his voice returning to that condescending drawl. "I'll see. Maybe she'll drop from the ceiling in uniform, huh?" A ripple of nervous laughter from the crowd followed. A woman chuckled, then looked away as if ashamed. The boy's camera caught every second. Ruby's hand trembled. "You've made your point," she said through her teeth. "Now back off." But he didn't. "Hey, relax," he said, still smiling. "No harm done. Just talking. You'd be surprised how many stories I've heard from people trying to sound important." Lila's chest rose and fell, her breath shaky, but her eyes locked on his. She didn't know the word for what she felt. It was too big, too new. It wasn't just anger. It was something colder, something that reached down into her bones. For the first time in her short life, she understood what it meant for someone to think you were less, not because of what you said, but because of who you were. The cashier, Trey, looked helpless behind the counter. He'd seen plenty of small dramas in the store, shoplifters, shouting matches, but this was different. He started to open his mouth, then closed it again when he saw the badge glint. Authority was tricky like that. "Let's go, baby," Ruby said again, her voice softer this time, almost pleading. Lila turned slowly, but not before meeting Harris's eyes one last time. "She's coming," she said quietly, each word a promise. Harris chuckled and gave a mock salute. "I'll be waiting, Captain's kid." Ruby steered her niece and nephew away, their cart rattling over the tiles. The boy with the phone turned and whispered to his friend, "Man, did you see that?" The friend laughed, shaking his head. Somewhere near the entrance, a group of teenagers watched, pretending not to. The moment stretched, then folded into the noise of the store again, the hum of the lights, the chatter, the everyday rhythm pretending nothing had happened. Harris leaned back against the display, exhaling slowly. He didn't feel guilty, not exactly. Maybe a little uneasy, like the laughter had come out louder than he'd meant. But she'd learn, he thought. The world didn't owe anyone belief. Better to find that out now. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through headlines, ignoring the faint tremor in his chest that felt an awful lot like shame. Down the aisle, the red tumbler gleamed in Lila's small hand, the silver letters catching the light again. Army Mom. She traced them with her thumb, whispering to herself, "He'll see." And somewhere out on the road between Fort Cavazos and Charlotte, a woman in uniform was already driving home, unaware that her name had just been turned into a joke, and that her arrival would soon turn the joke into something else entirely. For a few seconds after the words left his mouth, silence sat heavy in the air. It wasn't the kind of silence that brought peace, it was the kind that burned. The store's soundtrack of pop music kept playing above their heads, cheerful and indifferent, while the shoppers around them froze in that uncertain way people do when something ugly happens in public. A few turned to look, pretending they weren't. Others drifted closer, the pull of curiosity stronger than decency. Lila felt all those eyes on her, the strangers who didn't know her name but suddenly knew her shame. Officer Harris folded his arms, the smirk glued on his face. "See? She knows it's not true," he said to no one and everyone, like a performer playing to his audience. Kids always spin stories. I had one tell me his dad was Spider-Man once. Cute, right? The boy with the phone laughed, a quick, sharp sound that made Lila flinch. Ruby stepped forward, her voice tight as a drawn wire. "That's enough. You've had your joke. You made your point." "I didn't make any point," Harris said, his tone sweet and poisonous. "Just having a conversation. People these days are too sensitive." Lila's hands shook around the red tumbler. She could feel the words in her chest, pressing hard against her ribs, but they wouldn't come out. Her mom's face flickered in her mind. Steady eyes, quiet strength, the way she said, "Don't let anyone else write your story, baby. That's yours." The memory steadied her just enough to lift her chin. "My mom's in the Army," she said again. The words were small but solid, like stones laid in a row. Harris looked down at her, head tilted. "And I'm the Easter Bunny," he said lightly. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. Two women in yoga pants near the gum rack exchanged glances and smirked. A man in a plaid shirt let out a low whistle, shaking his head. The noise crawled under Lila's skin, turning her face hot. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the floor. Ruby's voice rose, trembling now with anger. "You ought to be ashamed, laughing at a child like that. What kind of man are you?" "The kind who tells the truth," Harris shot back, his smile thinning. "Look, no harm done. She'll figure it out eventually. The world's a tough place. Better to learn now than later that people don't always get to be heroes." Eli tugged at his aunt's sleeve. "Aunt Ruby," he whispered, "can we go?" Ruby glanced down at him, then at Lila. Her niece's face was a battlefield. Tears she refused to shed, humiliation she refused to show. "Come on, sweetheart," Ruby said softly, touching her arm. "Let's just go." But Lila didn't move. "You don't know her," she said, the words trembling but clear. "You don't know anything about her." Harris sighed like a man growing bored. "I know enough," he said, and that was when something shifted. The crowd stopped pretending to shop. They stood there, waiting. They didn't say anything, but their silence was a choice, and everyone in that moment knew it. One of the cashiers leaned toward another and whispered, "Should we call someone?" The other shook her head. "He's a cop." A woman holding a basket of baby clothes frowned but didn't speak. The man in plaid took a half step closer as if to intervene, then stopped himself. No one wanted to be the one to pick a side. The air grew thick. Lila's throat hurt from holding back the words that wanted to pour out. Her mom had told her once that courage wasn't loud. Maybe this was what she meant. Standing in a place that made you want to disappear and staying anyway. She took a breath and said, louder this time, "She's a captain. She just got back from Fort Cavazos." Harris raised his eyebrows. Fort Cavazos? Well, isn't that something? I used to know some real soldiers out there. And you're telling me your mom, what's her name? Lila hesitated. Naomi Brooks. He repeated it slowly, tasting it like something he wasn't sure he liked. Captain Naomi Brooks. Sure, I'll remember that. Ruby could see where this was going. That's enough, officer, she said, stepping between them. We're not here to argue with you. You don't have to believe her. He looked at her, that smug half grin curling again. No, I guess I don't. But it's funny, isn't it? Folks like you always trying to prove something. Don't have to lie for people to respect you, you know? People like us? Ruby said, her voice breaking into a quiet storm. Say what you mean. He spread his hands, feigning innocence. Nothing to say, just conversation. The lie hung there, sour and heavy. Lila's fingers tightened on the tumbler until she could feel the engraved letters under her thumb. Army Mom. The silver caught the light, flashing like a signal no one else could see. You'll see, she whispered, barely audible. What's that? Harris asked. Her voice steadied. You'll see, she said again, louder this time. He chuckled, shaking his head. Sure, kid. Maybe your mom will parachute through the ceiling. The boy with the phone snickered again. Ruby turned on him. You think this is funny? Delete that, right now. The boy mumbled, eyes darting, but didn't stop filming. Somewhere in the background, a manager's voice called for someone over the intercom, but no one came. The world kept turning while the moment stood still. Lila's heart pounded so hard she could hear it. Every sound around her seemed magnified. The buzz of the lights, the shuffle of feet, the rustle of plastic bags. She wanted to scream, but instead she said the only thing that came to her. You don't have to believe me. My mom doesn't need your permission to be who she is. The words surprised even her. For a heartbeat, Harris didn't know how to respond. His smile faltered, then returned like a reflex. All right then, he said, giving a mock salute. Guess we'll wait for the big entrance. Ruby wrapped her arm around Lila and turned her toward the exit. Come on, baby. Let's leave this fool to himself. As they walked away, the whispering started again. Quiet, cowardly. Lila caught pieces of it. Poor kid. She shouldn't make stuff up. Can you imagine? The words sliced through her like paper cuts. At the end of the aisle, she stopped and looked back. Harris was still there, leaning against the display, smiling like the whole thing had been entertainment. She wanted to tell him that her mom wasn't just a soldier, that she'd spent nights in tents with no roof, had carried wounded men out of danger, had earned every stripe she wore. But she didn't say it. She just looked at him long enough for him to notice her gaze. He raised his brows as if to say, "What?" She didn't blink. "You'll see," she mouthed one last time. Then she turned and followed her aunt. The laughter started again behind her, echoing down the aisle, smaller now but no less cruel. It chased her until the sliding doors hissed open and the warm air from outside hit her face. She stepped into the light, clutching the tumbler like it was something sacred, something that belonged only to her, and the truth she refused to let die. Inside, Officer Harris watched them go. He exhaled, half a sigh, half a snort. He didn't think about what he'd just done. He told himself it was nothing, just words. But somewhere deep, under all that armor of arrogance, a flicker of doubt stirred. He pushed it down, straightened his shirt, and pulled out his phone to check the time. It was almost 5. Shift change at the precinct. He'd tell the story later, probably get a few laughs out of it. He didn't notice the store camera above him turning, catching everything in quiet detail. He didn't notice the security guard watching from a distance, face tightening. He didn't notice the ripple that had started, the small, unseen shift that happens right before a reckoning. And Lila, outside in the sun, didn't know yet that her mom was already on her way, her car humming down the interstate, uniform pressed, boots polished, eyes fixed on home. She didn't know that the next time those sliding doors opened, the world inside would never sound the same again. Miguel had been working security at that Walmart for almost 3 years, long enough to know the rhythm of the place. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the constant whir of carts rolling across scuffed tile, the predictable chaos that came with weekends. Saturdays were usually loud but harmless. Kids running down the aisles, parents arguing over coupons, the occasional shoplifter trying to pocket batteries or nail polish. It was a job that required patience more than courage. But that afternoon, standing near the end of aisle 10 with a cup of stale coffee in hand, Miguel felt something shift in the air long before he understood why. He heard the laughter first. Sharp, cutting, too loud for the space it lived in. Laughter like that never belonged in a family store. It made people stop moving, made them listen even when they didn't want to. Miguel followed the sound until he saw it. The cop with the badge clipped to his belt, leaning against a rack of fishing poles, a smirk carved deep across his face. The man wasn't in uniform, but he carried himself like he thought the world owed him obedience. Across from him stood a little girl, no older than 11, her small shoulders squared like someone twice her size. Miguel didn't catch every word, but he heard enough. "My mom's in the army," the girl said. Then came the man's laugh, the kind that had no humor in it. Miguel's jaw tightened. He'd met that type before, men who hid behind badges and smiles, men who thought cruelty was just honesty with an edge. He took a slow breath and watched. The girl's aunt tried to intervene, and the man waved her off with that patronizing gesture Miguel had seen too many times. Around them, people started gathering, pretending to shop, but really watching the show. It was always like that. No one wanting to be the villain, but no one brave enough to stop him either. The girl stood frozen in the middle of it all, holding something red and shiny in her hands. Miguel saw the silver letters on the tumbler catch the light. Army Mom. He felt heat climb up the back of his neck. This wasn't his fight, he told himself. He needed the job. Rent was due next week, and security guards didn't get much sympathy if they stepped out of line, especially not ones with last names like Torres. Still, the sight of that kid standing there, her chin trembling, but her eyes refusing to drop, twisted something in him. He glanced toward the security camera mounted above the aisle and made a quiet decision. He pulled his phone from his pocket, opened the camera, and started recording. Not because he wanted trouble, but because he knew how stories like this usually got told later. If you didn't have proof, people said you imagined it. The man kept talking, his voice loud enough to reach the registers. "You sure she's not just cooking for them?" he said, chuckling. A few onlookers laughed nervously, and Miguel's stomach turned. The girl didn't flinch. "She's a captain," she said, her voice small but certain. "You'll see." Miguel felt something close to pride in a child he didn't even know. He zoomed in slightly, keeping the phone steady. Behind the camera, his hand trembled, not from fear, but from restraint. When the aunt tried to guide the kids away, the officer followed with another jab. "Maybe she'll parachute through the ceiling," he said, and that one broke the thin line of patience Miguel had left. He took a half step forward, ready to speak, but stopped when he saw the aunt's hand lift in warning. She didn't want it to escalate, and he couldn't blame her. The man had a badge, and people like that were used to winning arguments by default. The crowd began to drift away once the family moved toward the exit, their curiosity spent. But Miguel stayed where he was. The cop was still smiling, that smug little curve that said he'd made his point. Miguel wanted to tell him what he'd just done to that kid, how small she looked walking out, how every ounce of pride she carried had been trampled in front of strangers. But he said nothing. Instead, he slipped his phone back into his pocket, the video safe, the truth stored quietly like a weapon waiting for its time. He took a sip of cold coffee, grimacing, and turned toward the cameras in the ceiling. The red recording light blinked faintly. He knew the footage would back him up if anyone cared to check, but people rarely did. At the end of his shift, he stopped by the tiny security office near the back of the store. The monitor showed 12 different angles of Walmart life, checkout lines, the parking lot, the toy section. He rewound the feed to the time of the incident and froze the image. There they were, the little girl standing in front of the man with the badge, her face half hidden by her braids but unmistakably defiant. Miguel watched it twice. On the second replay, he noticed something else. The moment the man's expression changed. It was brief, maybe half a second, when she'd said, "You'll see." Something in her tone had unsettled him. The smirk faltered, just slightly, like a crack appearing on glass. Miguel leaned closer to the screen, a slow smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You'll see," he whispered. "Yeah, he will." When he clocked out, the evening sun had started to slide down behind the shopping plaza. The air outside was thick with summer heat, that kind that stuck to your skin and made you feel like the whole world was sweating with you. He lit a cigarette, took one drag, and thought about calling someone, his brother maybe, or the manager, to report what he'd seen. But then he pictured the look on his supervisor's face, the half laugh, half sigh. "He's a cop, Miguel. Just let it go." He'd heard it before. Instead, he unlocked his car and sat there for a while, engine off, listening to the sound of traffic. He replayed the video once more, watching the little girl's eyes. They were fierce, even through the humiliation. He thought about his own daughter, 6 years old, who still believed the world was fair. By the time he pulled out of the lot, the sky had turned gold and purple. In his rearview mirror, he saw the automatic doors slide open again and the same man walk out, still carrying that unearned confidence. Miguel's jaw tightened. He thought about what that kid had said. "You'll see." Something about it sounded like a promise, not a threat. He didn't know that, at that very moment, a black SUV was crossing the city limits of Charlotte, driven by a woman in a camouflage uniform with a beret folded neatly beside her. Her name was Captain Naomi Brooks, and she was coming home. Back inside the store, the noise picked up again, as if nothing had happened. Brittany at the engraving kiosk chatted with a new customer about personalized mugs. Trey cracked a joke with a woman buying dog food. The world moved on. Only a few people carried the memory of that moment, the small, cruel spectacle that everyone had witnessed and tried to forget. But Miguel didn't forget. He tucked his phone into his glove compartment, shut the door, and started the engine. The video was there if the girl's family ever needed it. He didn't know if they would. He didn't even know her name yet. But something told him he'd recognize her again if he ever saw her. And when he did, maybe he'd be able to tell her the truth, that someone saw what happened, someone believed her. As he drove off, he glanced once more at the store's glass doors reflecting the setting sun. Behind them, he could almost see her small silhouette walking away, her head still high, despite the weight she carried. The world hadn't broken her. Not yet. And somewhere down the highway, her mother's boots tapped steady against the car's floorboard, each mile bringing her closer to a reckoning neither of them could see, but both somehow felt. The sky had begun to turn that faint evening orange when the world inside the Walmart finally slowed. The laughter had died. The crowd scattered back to their carts and their errands, leaving behind a hollow quiet that clung to Lila like smoke. She stood near the exit with Aunt Ruby and Eli, the tumbler pressed to her chest, her small fingers gripping it tight enough to leave marks. Her throat hurt, her eyes burned, but she hadn't cried. Not yet. Ruby rubbed her shoulder softly, whispering that they should go, that some people didn't deserve their breath. But Lila didn't move. The air around her felt heavy and wrong, like something unfinished. She looked back once more down the long aisle toward the man who had mocked her. He was still there, leaning against the display, pretending he wasn't watching. He had his phone in his hand now, scrolling like the whole scene hadn't happened. A few shoppers glanced at him as they passed, uncertain whether to pity him or be afraid of him. Lila didn't care. The words still burned in her ears. Maybe she'll parachute through the ceiling. He'd said it like it was funny, but she could still hear the edge in it, the cruelty wrapped in a joke. Ruby tugged gently at her arm. "Baby, come on. Let's get home. Your mama's on her way." Lila blinked up at her, the tears finally threatening. "He doesn't believe me," she said. "You don't need him to." Ruby's voice softened. "You just wait. Truth always shows up on time." The automatic doors hissed open, and the heat from the parking lot swept in, thick with the smell of asphalt and fried food from the strip of restaurants outside. For a moment, Lila let Ruby's hand guide her forward, out into the light, but something inside her made her stop just past the threshold. She turned back, the sunlight cutting across her face. Behind her, Officer Harris pushed away from the display, watching the family leave. He didn't feel proud exactly, more restless, like he'd told an uncomfortable truth that no one wanted to admit. That was the story he'd tell himself later anyway. For now, he just wanted to leave the store, grab a beer, and forget the look on the kid's face. But something about that look lingered. It wasn't defiance exactly. It was faith. The kind of faith that didn't crack even when the world laughed. It bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Inside, near the security counter, Miguel leaned on his elbows and watched the monitors. The incident replayed on one of the screens. The cop, the girl, the laughter. He'd seen it all unfold again, and for the first time since he started that job, he was grateful for the store's cheap cameras. Proof mattered, especially when the wrong kind of man wore a badge. He saw the little girl walk out, still holding her head high, and he murmured under his breath, "You did good, kid. You did real good." Out in the parking lot, Ruby loaded the groceries while Eli climbed into the back seat, complaining about the heat. Lila stood beside the car door, staring at the road that led to the mall entrance. Her heart pounded like something was about to happen. She didn't know why. Maybe it was just wishful thinking. Maybe it was her mom's voice in her head, calm and steady. Stand tall when the world tries to make you small. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "You'll see." Inside the store, Harris finally pocketed his phone and made his way toward the registers. He wasn't smiling now. He was tired. The laughter had lost its taste. As he passed by a woman sorting yoga pants, she gave him a look, not angry, just disappointed. That was worse somehow. He grunted under his breath and reached the self-checkout line. The red tumbler still flashed in his mind, and for reasons he didn't understand, it made his stomach tighten. The overhead speakers crackled, announcing some deal in electronics. He scanned his items, swiped his card, and waited for the receipt to print. The world had gone back to normal, but normal didn't feel the same anymore. He looked toward the glass doors, thinking maybe he should just head out. Then he heard it. A faint rhythmic sound, muffled but growing louder. It wasn't music or conversation. It was boots. Heavy, steady, echoing across tile. At first, he didn't turn. The sound didn't register until it drew closer, sharper, like thunder rolling in from a clear sky. The shoppers near the entrance began to step aside instinctively, their chatter fading into quiet. The sound grew clearer with every step, click, pause, until Harris finally looked up. A woman was walking through the sliding doors, tall, composed, her posture so precise it demanded attention. The late sunlight followed her inside, glinting off the insignia on her sleeve. Camouflage uniform, beret tucked under one arm, boots polished to a shine that caught the store's harsh light. She wasn't rushing. She didn't need to. Every step said she knew exactly who she was and didn't have to prove it to anyone. For a second, the store seemed to forget to breathe. Conversation stopped. A kid in the candy aisle dropped a bag of Skittles, and the rattle of sugar against linoleum echoed louder than it should have. Lila saw her before anyone else. From outside, through the glass, she caught the familiar shape, the confident stride she'd known since she was little. Her breath caught in her throat. "Mama," she whispered. Ruby turned, squinting through the light. Naomi Brooks scanned the store with calm eyes, taking in the faces, the shoppers who paused, the cashier frozen mid-swipe, the man near the registers who suddenly straightened his back like he'd been caught doing something wrong. She didn't know yet what had happened, but she could feel it in the air. Humiliation leaves a smell behind, faint but distinct. Lila dropped the tumbler into the cart and took off running before Ruby could stop her. The automatic doors opened again, their soft hiss swallowed by the thud of boots on tile. Naomi's gaze snapped toward the sound, and the tightness in her shoulders melted into a rare softness. "Lila? Mom?" The child slammed into her with the force of 100 unshed tears. Naomi knelt, catching her, holding her tight. Hey, I got you," she said quietly, kissing her hair. "You okay?" Lila nodded against her chest, voice trembling. "He didn't believe me." Naomi froze for a moment. Her hand paused on the back of her daughter's head. "Who didn't?" Lila pulled back just enough to glance toward the registers, toward the man in the Panther's shirt standing very still now. Naomi followed her gaze. Their eyes met. Recognition didn't come, but something else did. A sharp, instinctive understanding. The crowd around them sensed it too, the strange quiet before a storm. Harris shifted his weight, trying to look casual, but his throat felt dry. The badge at his belt suddenly felt heavier than it had in years. Naomi stood slowly, her daughter's small hand still in hers. She adjusted the beret under her arm and squared her shoulders. Her voice, when it came, was low, but carried through the aisles like a command. Who laughed at my daughter? No one answered. The silence broke only by the faint hum of the freezers and the squeak of a cart somewhere far away. Harris looked down, pretending to scan his receipt, but it was too late. People were already looking at him. Naomi's gaze landed on his badge. Her jaw tightened, but her face remained calm. Was it you, officer? Harris cleared his throat. Ma'am, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Naomi's tone didn't change. There usually is. The words hung there like smoke. Ruby hurried back through the doors, out of breath, her voice a mixture of relief and dread. Naomi, just let's go outside, okay? It's done. But Naomi didn't move. She kept her eyes on the man who had mocked her daughter and said quietly, not yet. The store, the lights, the people, they all seemed to fade to the edges of the frame. The only thing that mattered now was the space between them. Lila squeezed her mother's hand, whispering, you'll see. Naomi nodded slightly, her eyes never leaving the man's. Yes, baby, she said, her voice calm and certain. He will. Naomi Brooks didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The way she stood, shoulders back, boots planted firm, uniform pressed to perfection, was louder than any shout could have been. The store seemed to hold its breath, frozen in the space between a question and an answer. Lila clung to her mother's hand, the small fingers squeezing tighter, drawing courage from the warmth that had steadied her since she was born. Naomi's eyes stayed on the man with the badge, watching him the way a soldier watches an unguarded perimeter, calm, patient, ready. Harris shifted his weight, the paper receipt trembling slightly between his fingers. Evening, ma'am, he said, forcing a polite half smile. Didn't mean to cause any trouble here. Just a little misunderstanding, that's all. Naomi tilted her head, the faintest trace of a smile ghosting across her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. A misunderstanding? She repeated softly. That's what we're calling it? Ruby caught up, breathless, her heart pounding in her chest. Naomi, please, she said in a low voice. Let's just go. He's not worth it. But Naomi didn't move. She took a step closer to Harris, her boots clicking sharply on the tile. My daughter said you laughed at her, she said, each word deliberate. You called her a liar. Is that true? Harris let out a short, uncomfortable chuckle. Ma'am, I think she might have taken it the wrong way. I was just talking. Didn't mean any disrespect. Naomi's expression didn't change. I spent half my life learning how to read people, officer. I can tell the difference between a mistake and a mockery. A woman nearby, middle-aged, white hair tied back, a shopping basket in her hands, stopped pretending to browse. She stood a few feet away now, watching, her mouth set in a tight line. Harris straightened his back, trying to recover control. Look, I'm sorry if she misunderstood me. You know how kids can be. They like to exaggerate. Naomi's gaze sharpened. Exaggerate? She glanced down at Lila, who looked up at her with wide, steady eyes. Tell me, what exactly did she exaggerate? Harris rubbed the back of his neck. She said her mom was a captain. That's all. I've been in law enforcement a long time, ma'am, seen my share of things. It just caught me off guard hearing something like that. And why is that? Naomi asked quietly. What part of that was so hard to believe? He hesitated, opening his mouth, then closing it again. I didn't mean anything by it, he muttered. That's the thing about meaning, Naomi said, her tone steady as steel. Intent doesn't erase impact. The words cut through the air like a blade. The woman with the basket shifted her weight, then spoke up, her voice trembling slightly but firm. I saw what happened, she said. He laughed first. The girl didn't lie. Every head nearby turned toward her. Harris's eyes flicked between them, his confidence faltering. Lady, you don't even know what was said. I know what I heard, the woman replied, her cheeks flushed with anger. And I know what I saw, a grown man picking on a child. Another voice joined in. Trey, the cashier. She's telling the truth, he said. I was right over there. Harris's jaw tensed. He could feel the eyes closing in, the invisible line between him and the rest of the room drawing sharper by the second. All right, he said, forcing a laugh that didn't sound like one. Everybody calm down. I already said I was sorry. Naomi folded her arms, her expression unreadable. No, she said quietly. You said you didn't mean harm. That's not the same thing. Miguel appeared then, walking slowly from the back of the store, his security badge catching the light. In his hand, his phone was already open, the screen glowing. Ma'am, he said to Naomi, I've got the footage. Cameras caught everything. The crowd murmured, the sound rippling through the aisles. Harris's face went pale. Footage? Miguel nodded, looking at him now. You said some things that shouldn't have been said, officer. Best to own up before someone else plays this on the internet. Naomi didn't look at the screen. She didn't need proof. She'd already seen enough. I don't need a recording, she said quietly. I need him to understand. The quiet grew heavier. Somewhere at the front of the store, a child began to cry, the sound fragile and distant. Harris exhaled, the fight draining from him. Look, Sergeant. Captain. Naomi corrected, her tone still soft but edged. He swallowed. Captain Brooks, I shouldn't have laughed. I was out of line. I'm sorry. Lila's hand squeezed her mother's, but Naomi didn't nod, didn't offer the relief he was hoping for. That wasn't an apology, she said, voice low but unrelenting. That was you trying to make this go away. The older woman with the basket crossed her arms. She's right. The officer's face flushed crimson. His eyes darted toward the exit, then back at Naomi. What do you want me to say? Naomi took another step forward until she stood close enough for him to see the faint lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the kind carved by years of discipline and distance. Look at her, she said, nodding toward Lila. And say what you came here to say. For a moment he didn't move. Then slowly, reluctantly, he turned toward the girl. Lila stood still, her chin trembling, her eyes bright with a mix of fear and pride. I'm sorry, kid, Harris said quietly. Naomi's voice sharpened just enough to slice through the stillness. Try again. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry, Lila, he said louder this time. I shouldn't have laughed at you. I shouldn't have said what I said. You told the truth, and I didn't believe you. That was wrong. The words hung in the air, heavy but clean this time. Lila nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered. Naomi's expression softened for the first time. She gave her daughter's hand a gentle squeeze. Then she looked back at Harris. Next time you feel the urge to laugh at someone's truth, remember this moment. Remember how it felt to be the one everyone was looking at. Harris dropped his gaze. Yes, ma'am. Miguel pocketed his phone, now the tension in his shoulders easing. We good here, Captain? He asked quietly. Naomi took a breath, her voice calm again. For now. The crowd began to disperse, conversations picking up in hushed tones. The woman with the basket gave Naomi a nod of quiet respect before heading toward the registers. Harris remained where he was, his face pale, his badge suddenly meaningless in the shadow of her uniform. Naomi turned to Lila. You all right, baby? Lila nodded, her eyes glistening. I told him you'd come. Naomi smiled softly. You did good. You stood tall. Ruby let out a long, shaky breath. I swear, Naomi, I thought you were gonna. Naomi shook her head. No need. He's already learned what he came here to learn. As they turned to leave, the sound of polite applause rose behind them, just a few claps at first, then more. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to fill the space that had once held silence and cruelty. Naomi didn't look back. She didn't need to. Some truths didn't require witnesses. The sliding doors opened, and the warm evening air met them. Lila stepped outside first, clutching her mother's hand like it was the only thing that still made sense. Naomi followed, her shadow long and straight under the setting sun. Inside, Harris stood frozen for a long time before finally folding his receipt and shoving it into his pocket. He glanced once toward the cameras, then toward the exit, his reflection ghostly in the glass. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this quiet, humiliating reckoning, would follow him longer than any badge ever could. The air in the store had changed. It wasn't loud anymore, but it wasn't calm either. It was the kind of quiet that follows a thunderclap, still trembling, still alive. Naomi Brooks stood in that silence, her uniform catching the sterile white light from above. She didn't move, didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. The authority that lived in her wasn't stitched into the fabric of her camouflage or pinned on her chest. It was something older, something deeper. Across from her, Officer Dale Harris looked smaller than he had 10 minutes ago. The badge on his belt no longer gleamed like a shield. It hung there, heavy and dull. Sweat had gathered at the back of his neck, and his fingers twitched where they rested against the receipt in his hand. Around them, people lingered near the aisles, pretending to shop, but watching every word like witnesses at a trial. Naomi's tone was even when she spoke. You said it caught you off guard. Hearing that my daughter's mother could be a captain. Why? Harris swallowed. I told you, it wasn't what I meant. I didn't ask what you meant, she said. I asked why. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. The question wasn't complicated, but it left him nowhere to hide. He tried to find a safe answer, one that would sound reasonable. I guess I just didn't expect it, he muttered. Didn't expect what? Naomi asked, tilting her head slightly. A woman? A black woman? The words hit like a hammer. A few people in the crowd shifted uneasily, pretending to study nearby shelves. No one dared to speak. Harris's face turned red. Now hold on. I never said that. You didn't have to, Naomi said. Your laugh said it for you. A few nods rippled quietly through the crowd. A man near the checkout counter crossed his arms. The woman with the basket stood a little taller. Harris's mouth opened and closed again like he was trying to breathe underwater. Naomi stepped closer, her voice dropping lower but cutting sharper. You saw a little black girl speak proudly about her mother, and instead of hearing her words, you heard a lie. That says more about you than it ever could about her. The air felt electric, the hum of the lights suddenly too loud. Harris took a slow breath and tried again. I didn't mean any harm. I already said I was sorry. No, Naomi said quietly. You said the words. You haven't earned the meaning. She looked around the store, her gaze sweeping over the faces that had gathered. This isn't about one man and one child. It's about what happens when someone with power decides whose truth is worth believing. The crowd was utterly silent now. Even the music over the speakers seemed to fade away. Trey, the young cashier, stood frozen by his register, his hands resting on the counter. Miguel lingered by the end of the aisle, his phone still in his pocket, but his thumb hovering near the record button, just in case. Naomi continued, her voice steady but firm. I've spent 22 years in service to this country. I've led soldiers through terrain most people will never see. I've written letters to mothers who lost their sons and walked through gunfire to pull my own out. Every stripe on this uniform was earned, but the hardest battle I fight, she paused, is here, convincing people like you that someone like me exists. Harris's jaw tightened. He stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. I said I was wrong, he whispered. That's a start, Naomi said. But an apology isn't supposed to make you feel better. She nodded toward Lila. It's supposed to make the person you hurt believe you've learned something. Harris looked at the girl again. Lila stood half behind her mother, half beside her, holding her ground. Her eyes were red from holding back tears, but she didn't hide them. Harris's throat worked as he tried to speak. I'm sorry, he said, the words quiet but clearer this time. You told the truth. I didn't listen. That was wrong. Naomi studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. Better. From somewhere behind them a voice said, That's right. The woman with the basket again. Others murmured in agreement. Naomi turned slightly, addressing everyone now. Respect doesn't cost you anything, she said. But when you take it away, you take something from a person that's hard to give back. She crouched down beside Lila, her voice softening. You remember this, baby. People will doubt you. They'll laugh, but the truth doesn't need permission to exist. Lila nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. Naomi stood again and faced Harris one last time. You wear that badge because people trust you to protect them. Start earning that trust by seeing people for who they are, not who you think they should be. Harris nodded stiffly, eyes down. He wanted to disappear, to walk out the door and pretend this moment never happened, but the weight of it clung to him like a shadow. Miguel stepped forward now, breaking the stillness. Captain Brooks, he said respectfully, if you ever need that footage, I've got it saved. Just say the word. Naomi gave him a nod of acknowledgement. Thank you, officer. He smiled faintly. I'm not an officer, ma'am. Just security. Doesn't matter, Naomi said. You did the right thing when it counted. That's what makes someone an officer. The compliment seemed to light something in him. He straightened up, a quiet pride settling in his chest. A few of the shoppers started clapping, softly at first, unsure if it was allowed. Then more joined in until the sound filled the store, not a loud cheer, but a slow, steady rhythm of agreement. Harris stood there, red-faced, caught between the applause and his own humiliation. Naomi didn't smile. She simply turned, her arm around Lila's shoulders, guiding her toward the exit where Ruby waited, tears glistening in her eyes. As they walked, The applause followed them, fading only when the sliding doors opened with their soft hiss and let in the cool breath of evening. Outside, the sky had turned a deep shade of gold. Naomi stopped just before stepping off the curb and looked down at her daughter. "You proud of yourself?" Lila nodded, the corner of her mouth twitching upward. "A little," Naomi smiled. "Good. You should be." Behind them, through the glass, Harris still stood near the registers, staring after them. The crowd had already moved on, the clapping over, the noise of commerce creeping back in. But he stayed there, still and small, replaying every second in his head. The laughter that had come so easily to him before now sounded hollow. Naomi opened the car door for Lila and helped her climb in. Ruby exhaled, shaking her head. "You handled that better than I ever could," she said. Naomi adjusted her beret and smiled faintly. "I've handled worse." As they pulled out of the parking lot, Naomi glanced once in the rearview mirror. Harris was still visible through the store's front window, standing alone under the fluorescent light. The reflection of her own face stared back at her in the glass. Tired but unbowed, she turned her eyes to the road. "Let's go home," she said softly. Lila leaned back in her seat, the red tumbler resting in her lap. She traced her fingers over the engraved letters, "Army Mom," and whispered a quiet thank you to no one in particular. For the first time that day, the weight in her chest began to lift. For a long moment after Naomi and Lila turned toward the doors, no one spoke. The echo of their footsteps was the only sound that filled the space, slow and measured, the kind of rhythm that leaves a mark on memory. Officer Harris stood in the same place, motionless, his hands hanging at his sides. The receipt he had been holding drifted to the floor like a piece of surrender. Around him, people began to move again, small, uncertain movements, the kind that follow a storm when the world isn't sure if it's safe yet. Then, quietly at first, a ripple of applause rose from somewhere near the back. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a few soft claps, then a few more. It spread through the crowd like a wave, steady and certain. Trey at the register clapped. The woman with the basket clapped. Even Miguel, leaning against the wall with his phone tucked away, joined in. The sound filled the store, not wild or celebratory, but something deeper, something that sounded like respect, finding its way back to where it belonged. Naomi stopped at the door and turned just slightly, her profile catching the light. She didn't bow, didn't wave. She simply nodded once, a gesture that said everything words could not. Beside her, Lila stood taller than she had all day, her small hand gripping the tumbler against her chest like a metal urn. Naomi looked down at her and smiled. "That's enough," she whispered. As they stepped outside, the applause faded, replaced by the hum of the parking lot, the buzz of streetlights warming up, the distant sound of a car alarm somewhere, the low rumble of a passing bus. The evening air felt cool and heavy with the scent of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Ruby was waiting by the car, her hand pressed against her chest. When she saw them, her eyes welled up. "You did it," she said quietly. Naomi shook her head. "No, she did." She rested her hand on Lila's shoulder. "She told the truth and didn't back down." Ruby nodded, looking at her niece. "That's her mama in her. I saw it the second she said, 'You'll see.'" Lila blushed, ducking her head. "I didn't know what else to say." Naomi smiled softly. "Sometimes that's all you have to say." They loaded the car in silence, each of them replaying what had just happened. The sound of those boots on tile, the way the store had gone quiet, the look on that man's face when the truth finally landed. Inside, Harris still hadn't moved. He ran a hand down his face, feeling the sweat and the sting of embarrassment. His ears still rang with Naomi's words, "Intent doesn't erase impact." He wanted to believe that he wasn't that man, the kind of man who humiliated a child. But denial felt hollow now. He could still see the girl's eyes, wide, steady, too knowing for her age. The kind of eyes that haunt you because they don't hate you. They pity you. He took a deep breath and walked toward the nearest exit, his boots heavy against the floor. As he passed Miguel, the security guard looked up from his post. "Evening, officer," Miguel said, not with sarcasm, but with something that sounded like quiet disappointment. Harris stopped, wanting to say something, but all that came out was a nod. He pushed through the doors and stepped into the fading light. The parking lot smelled of hot pavement and diesel. For the first time that day, he didn't feel in control of his own body. His heart raced in his chest, not from fear, but from shame. Out near the curb, he saw Naomi's car. She was tucking her daughter into the back seat, the girl still clutching the tumbler like it was part of her. Harris hesitated, then started walking toward them. He didn't have a plan, just an ache in his chest that told him leaving now would make everything worse. Ruby saw him first. "Naomi," she said, her tone a warning. Naomi turned, eyes narrowing, ready. Harris stopped a few feet away, his hands raised slightly as if surrendering. "Captain Brooks," he said, I wanted to say something." Ruby folded her arms. "You already said enough." But Naomi lifted a hand to stop her. "Go ahead," she said. Harris's voice was rough. "You were right, about all of it, about me." He looked at Leela, then back at Naomi. "I've worn this badge a long time, long enough to forget it doesn't mean I'm better than anyone. I don't expect forgiveness. He paused, searching for words that felt too big for his throat. "I want you to know I'll remember this. I'll make sure I do." Naomi studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded once. "Then make it worth something," she said quietly. "An apology's only as good as what comes after." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am." Lila watched him, her young face thoughtful. "You really didn't think my mom could be a soldier?" she asked softly. Harris sighed. "I didn't think," he admitted. "That's the problem." Naomi opened her door. "Then start," she said. "Good night, officer." He stepped back as they got in the car. The engine started, the headlights washing over him for a moment before the vehicle pulled away. He stood there, hands in his pockets, watching until the taillights disappeared into the line of traffic. Somewhere deep down, something shifted. A piece of himself he hadn't known was cracked until it broke open. Inside the car, the tension slowly melted. Ruby let out a long sigh and said, "You know, Naomi, there's not a single soul in that store who's ever going to forget what they saw tonight." Naomi kept her eyes on the road. "Good? Maybe they'll think twice next time before they let silence do the talking." Lila leaned her head against the window, the glow of the city lights sliding across her face. "Mom? Yes, baby?" "Were you scared?" Naomi smiled faintly. "No, I was angry. There's a difference." Leela thought about that for a while, the rhythm of the road lulling her toward calm. She looked down at the tumbler in her lap, tracing the letters again, Army Mom, and whispered to herself, "He saw." "Yes, he did," Naomi said quietly without turning her head. Back at the store, Miguel watched from the window as the SUV pulled onto the main road. He felt a strange sense of satisfaction, like justice had finally stretched its arms and yawned. He opened his phone, scrolled through the video he'd recorded, and hovered over the delete button. After a moment, he decided not to. Some truths were worth keeping, not to weaponize, but to remember. He saved it to a folder and titled it The Captain. Inside the Walmart, the world resumed its rhythm again. Scanners beeping, carts squeaking, the familiar hum of fluorescent lights reclaiming the air. But something lingered in the silence that followed between each sound. A faint echo of boots striking tile and a child's voice saying, "You'll see." Out on the highway, Naomi drove in steady silence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near her daughter's seat. Lila had fallen asleep, her face turned toward the window, peaceful now. Ruby glanced back at her and then looked at Naomi. "You know, I think she'll remember this day forever." Naomi nodded. "So will he," she said. The road stretched ahead, smooth and endless, the streetlights flickering in soft rhythm. And somewhere behind them, in a Walmart filled with strangers, the echo of respect, hard-earned and long overdue, still hung in the air, quiet but unbreakable. Rain came that night, slow and steady, the kind that brushed against windows like a reminder that the world keeps moving, no matter what happened under its daylight. The Brooks house sat on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, where the porch lights glowed warm and the smell of wet grass drifted through open screens. Naomi had changed out of her uniform hours ago, trading the stiff camouflage for an old gray sweatshirt and worn jeans. Her hair was loose now, her face softer, though the weight of the day still lingered behind her eyes. Lila sat cross-legged on the couch, the red tumbler resting on her knees. The engraved letters caught the soft lamplight, Army Mom, and gleamed faintly, like they had their own heartbeat. Eli had fallen asleep half on her shoulder, his hand clutching a cookie he never finished. Ruby was in the kitchen washing the last of the dishes, humming quietly to herself. The house felt safe again, but there was a stillness under that safety, a space where words hadn't yet been said. Naomi watched her daughter, smiling at the sight of her trying to stay awake. "You can sleep, baby," she said softly. "It's been a long day." Lila shook her head. "I don't want to. I keep thinking about him." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "The officer?" "Yeah." Lila traced the letters on the tumbler with her thumb. "He looked scared at the end. Not like he was scared of you, like he was scared of himself." Naomi nodded slowly. "Maybe he was. Sometimes the hardest thing to face is the mirror." She took a deep breath, her eyes moving toward the rain-streaked window. People carry ideas about the world that they don't even know they're carrying. They wear them like invisible coats. Then one day someone shows up and rips it right off them. Feels cold, embarrassing. But maybe that's how change starts. Lila was quiet for a moment, thinking about that. "He said he'd remember," she whispered. "Do you think he really will?" Naomi looked back at her daughter, her voice low and certain. "Yes, because the truth sticks, baby, especially when you try to run from it." A small smile tugged at the corner of Lila's mouth. "I didn't cry," she said, almost proudly. "I know," Naomi said, a warmth spreading through her chest. "You stood tall. You did what I've always hoped you'd do, stood up when it mattered." She leaned forward, brushing a curl from Lila's cheek. "I'm proud of you, more than you'll ever know." For a moment the house was quiet, except for the rain and the soft ticking of the clock. Then Ruby appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a towel. "Lord, that was something, wasn't it?" she said, shaking her head. "You should have seen those faces, Naomi. They were hanging on every word you said. I think half the store learned something tonight." Naomi chuckled softly. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll just tell the story to someone else, like gossip." Ruby leaned on the doorframe. "That's how lessons travel sometimes. Doesn't matter who tells it, as long as it gets told." Naomi smiled faintly. "Maybe you're right." The sound of her phone buzzing on the table broke the moment. She picked it up and frowned slightly at the known number. "Hello?" A male voice, cautious, came through the line. "Captain Brooks? This is Officer Dale Harris." Ruby stiffened from the doorway. Naomi's expression didn't change. "Yes," she said evenly. "I hope I'm not calling too late. I wanted to say something. I've been thinking about what happened. A lot." Naomi didn't interrupt. She let the silence do the work. "I filed my own report," Harris continued, "about myself, told the department what I did, what I said. I don't know what'll come of it, but it felt wrong to just walk away." Naomi's tone was calm. That was the right thing to do. He exhaled, the sound faint through the phone. "I don't expect forgiveness, ma'am, but I wanted you to know I looked you up. You weren't lying about anything. You've done more for this country than I ever have. And I made a fool of myself in front of a child who had more courage than I'll ever see in a mirror." Naomi's eyes softened. "Then don't make that the end of it," she said quietly. "Learn from it. Be better next time, and maybe teach someone else before they make the same mistake." There was a pause, the rain filling the space between them. "Yes, ma'am," he said finally. "Thank you for not yelling." Naomi smiled faintly. "I save yelling for boot camp." He let out a small, surprised laugh. "Good night, Captain." "Good night, officer," she said, ending the call. Ruby stared at her. "He called you? That's a twist I didn't see coming." Naomi shrugged. "Maybe there's hope for him yet." Lila looked up from the couch. "What did he say?" "That he's learning," Naomi said. "And that's enough for now." Lila nodded, her eyes heavy with sleep. "Then I guess the truth won." Naomi smiled softly, brushing a hand over her daughter's hair. The truth always wins. Sometimes it just takes a while to catch up. Ruby turned off the last light, leaving only the lamp by the window. The rain outside glowed orange in the reflection of the streetlights, each drop a tiny spark falling through the dark. Lila finally drifted off, her breathing slow and even. Naomi sat beside her, the tumbler resting on the coffee table, its silver letters shining under the lamplight. Her gaze lingered on it for a long moment, and in the quiet she thought about all the things that had brought her here. The missions overseas, the endless days of command, the letters home written in tents that smelled of dust and fear. And now this, a small act of dignity in a store aisle, proof that sometimes the biggest battles weren't fought on foreign soil, but right here, between people who should have known better. She reached out, tracing the words Army Mom with her fingertips, and whispered, That's all I ever wanted her to be proud of. Outside, the rain began to slow. Across town, under the glow of a street lamp, Officer Harris sat in his patrol car, staring out at the wet asphalt. His badge lay on the passenger seat beside a paper cup of coffee gone cold. He replayed her words in his head. Respect doesn't cost you anything. He turned the engine off and just listened to the rain, the sound washing something clean inside him that he hadn't known was dirty. Back at the Brooks house, the clock ticked past midnight. Naomi rose quietly and turned off the lamp. Before she went upstairs, she looked back one more time at her daughter asleep on the couch, her face peaceful, her hands still resting on that red tumbler like it was a piece of truth she never intended to let go of. In the darkness, Naomi smiled. "You did good, baby," she whispered. "You did real good." The rain stopped at last, leaving the world wrapped in a gentle hush. Somewhere in that silence, a small lesson settled into the hearts of everyone who had witnessed it, near and far. A reminder that the loudest power in the world isn't authority or anger, it's quiet dignity. And that night, under a calm Carolina sky, dignity had the final word.